Hey everybody, welcome to the FIA Show! It seems like we have a little delay on our box of laughter and applause tonight, so that's okay. Woo! Our Forget It All show. I'm super excited tonight to have these two rock stars here. Mitch, the lawyer, masturbates. Okay, let's try this again. Mitch is a super, Mitch, the amazing lawyer, Bates. Okay, been on here before. People love him. Super smart, super honest. And just a lovable guy. So thanks so much for being here, Mitch. We appreciate
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, totally. And Preston, Schmidt, everybody knows Preston here. Preston is mortgage broker extraordinaire with Mission35 and knows a tremendous amount of private lending. He has a unique position to be able to act on both sides of the coin with a lot of stuff. So that's what we're going to talk about today is private investing. It was probably, I want to say, a $200 million business maybe 4 or 5 years ago. In 2018, it's estimated to have over probably $3 billion worth of funded mortgages. It's something that is blowing up in this market right now.
Lots of growth.
Totally, and I think a lot of people are talking about it because private lending's changing all the time, and it's an unregulated marketplace. And Mission35 and our FIA show, we're really about how to help you increase your wealth and educate you on investing. So lots of people want to private invest. So Preston, tell me, what do you think the benefits are about private investing right now? What's good about it?
Private lending certainly has a lot of opportunity right now with the sort of transition of self-employed people being pushed out of the markets and the stress tests. It sort of forced a lot of people to have to look to the private market for money. So there's lots of quality deals out in the private space.
Totally, I totally agree. You know what? And it's blowing up right now because it's just pushing more and more and more people down, right?
Absolutely.
How many are you seeing? A lot of private transactions come across your desk now, like in comparison to maybe last year?
Yeah. Well, last year was busy too for them, but this year I think our numbers would show an increase. I don't know, 10-15% in just the quantity of deals, but there's a lot. We're doing a lot more private firsts for bigger amounts than we used to. We used to do a lot of seconds only and first, but there's a lot more first mortgages. So people that are using private money to actually purchase properties right off the bat are going private, like Preston was saying, because they can't qualify for institutional money.
Would you say almost over the last 3 years we've seen probably a pretty tremendous growth in the private sector?
Absolutely. From my experience, a very big jump. And 7 years ago when I started doing real estate transactions, it was a very small percentage of the work we did. And I when I first saw private mortgage deals back then, I wasn't even really familiar with the market at all. And real estate lawyers in general are aware of it because they act on the deals. But now it's very common for clients to come into me and just ask me directly about my experience with private mortgages. People that would never have brought it up or that I would have had any knowledge of it are much more aware of it, and so I field questions on it a lot, and there's a lot more deals happening. So
yeah, I find it's actually really challenging now, especially on the broker side, because the unfortunate thing is you're seeing people right now with good credit scores that were usually bank clients.
Absolutely.
That are now, you have to turn around and say, unfortunately, you know what, I know you were a 3.5% client before, but now you've got to pay 7 or 8% because there's no other option.
Absolutely. Well, and also you can see the transition from the private lending perspective that because there's so many opportunities, they're able to say no.
Yeah.
And so you can see definitely a big transition for something that someone might have taken a risk on before. I've got a lender that I work with all the time who's getting 3 or 4 deals a day, and he's a relatively small lender, so he can pick and choose. And so those people that maybe you took a risk on before, or people were able to go out and get the financing quite easily, they're able to say no to.
Yeah. So what does that mean as a borrower, right? So because I think we've got two different sides. So as a borrower right now, because I think a lot of people don't understand that, right? In the sense that used to be, if you had equity, you could get a mortgage, right?
Absolutely.
You had 25%, you'll get a mortgage, right? But now you've got, like to your point, you've got investors that are saying, you know what, I can choose from loan A, B, C, or D. I don't want to lend you the money.
I think specifically even in our area, part of what's happened is we've seen a growth in the real estate business period. So there's more people wanting to get into the opportunity. And so as a side effect to that, because there's so many people interested in getting into it and they're being pushed into that unconventional space, as a borrower, you're sort of facing, inevitable when the supply or the demand is super high, the price goes up.
Yeah.
And so what you're seeing is that, when you need a first mortgage, maybe you had someone who would do a 1% fee and 7% as a private lender. It's now 8.5% and a 2% fee.
Yeah.
Or the second mortgages. I was talking to a gentleman at the gym that does some private mortgages, and they declined a deal at 12% because they didn't want to do it, and the borrower came back and said, "We'll pay you 15." And so you can see that there's this tug, this sort of push and pull, and as a result, the guy said he didn't end up doing the mortgage, but that's not the point. Is that the appetite is so much because people have put themselves in a spot, or they're so desperate to get their deal done, that they're walking themselves into a higher price.
So what that means to me, if I'm hearing that as an investor, then there's more, if the guys that were already doing it are able to pick and choose what they want, that means that there's more opportunities for people on the sidelines now with money that can come in and
invest money.
Absolutely.
And invest money, right? So,
yep. Well, I think there's an interesting thing that nobody really talks about, and that's delinquency rates, right? So when we're in the mortgage space and we look at delinquency rates, typically that's a number that's put out by CMHC or somebody else.
Which is typically going to be A lending.
Exactly, right? So now we end up looking, I'm curious to see your perspective on this, because there is no way of tracking delinquency of private mortgages. And with more and more people getting them all the time, that's something that I look at and say, okay, you know what? I think we're in a relatively good market, but with lending constricting, more people going there, we've got a delinquency rate that looks really, really good, but underneath the surface, is it?
Yeah, and I don't know the answer to that because there aren't any numbers on it. But my understanding is institutional mortgages, or I guess A lenders, it's the lowest default rate.
Totally, they're perfect.
For sure,
but that's what people talk about. I'm just saying, do you see many defaults come across your desk, or do you see?
I do. I see them from time to time, but and I don't do enforcement work really. But sometimes I have borrowers that come in that are coming in and saying that they've been given a notice of sale from their lender's lawyer. I'm dealing with a couple of those right now, where they were in private mortgages and the terms were. For whatever reason they can't make the payments, and so they're losing their house or whatever. If they can find another mortgage to buy that one out and save it, maybe they can. But it's really hard for me to give an indication of what, in general, the market delinquency rates would be for private mortgages in general. But I'm seeing more. I'm referring more people to mortgage enforcement lawyers than I would have been, 3 or 4 years ago for sure. But that's just my limited.
And part of that perspective of not understanding the numbers is because it's a highly unregulated space. There are no rules though there are some rules, but I'm
you
not.
You can't charge more than 60%.
60%, I think, 60. Is real.
59, you can slide under. But 60,
it seems there's a big window between 60 and
It's like the speed limit in the States. 55 is fine.
Exactly. So
just kidding. Okay, that's high, right?
Yeah, that's high, and sometimes unfortunately I see that sometimes when borrowers come in that are in default, and and I. Files where I've never been involved in them, but now they're coming to me and saying, here's the spot that we're in, and then I'm seeing the terms of some of these private mortgages, and some of them are sickening, where you see, cost of borrowing at 45% or above, and the terms of the deal don't dictate that. The risk reward doesn't match up, and that's one of the other problems with it from a borrower's perspective. If we're thinking about the borrower, the market isn't really competitive, and if you go and talk to a broker, and we're here with people that are honest people. I've done tons of deals with both of these people, and I've seen the deals that they put together. I'm not speaking about but I'm not speaking about them. But if we're being serious about this, what I would say to borrowers is, if you're in a deal, make sure you talk to another broker or talk to somebody else, and don't if you're looking at if you're in a tough spot and somebody's pressuring you into something and telling you that you have no other choice, and you're going to lose your house if you don't sign off on this deal. I hear stories like that from borrowers that have been exploited, and it's really sickening and it's really sad. So I think I'd like to see people talk to other people about it because I know.
And you know, to sort of deal with somebody who has an understanding of the business, right?
Absolutely.
Because there's no regulation, is that there are people who have different motivations. Like the private space, what you'll find is there's people who have appetite for lots of things, but they're usually specific. There's a guy who's in construction who lends because he knows if he can take over the property because he can fix it up. There's somebody who just has a pile of money who wants a very low reward. And then there's the people who may have the wrong intentions, and you need to make sure that you understand where you are, because lots of times, and I think you could attest to this, is that the people are in an emotional decision. It's a terribly emotional thing to someone saying you're losing your house, you have to go do something, or you know, my credit's getting destroyed, or whatever that is, and you have to try to see through that, or go to or make sure you're going to somebody who's not taking advantage of you because of that emotion.
And there's shame. Sometimes there's shame. I think I hear this from people that there's sometimes shame associated with having to get a second mortgage or a private mortgage.
Well, it's embarrassing.
Yeah, it's embarrassing. But it shouldn't. But it really shouldn't be. You know, it's super important, and so talk to other people about it. That's really what
the one thing I'd say about that,
know what they're talking about,
which I found right now, which is tough in that, because normally when we priced out private mortgages, we say, hey, take a look at this. We think it's a good deal. We're not trying to put the pressure on, but the challenge now is because let's say I have $1 million, and Mitch comes to me and says, I need 100,000, right? I have 10 other options if I'm an investor right now that are coming to me daily because the market's getting fluctuated. So what's happening now is, in turn, lenders are putting pressure on people now to say, hey, listen, man, I do need you to shit or get off the pot.
Take it or leave it.
Because you know what? I'm not a bank with $1 billion. I've only got $1 million. And if you're not going to take it, then I'm lending it to Sally, Joe, Jim, or Bob, right? So I think
that's fair enough. That's a different type of pressure.
Oh, no, I know.
I'm saying, like, sign right now in front of me, or you're gonna, you know, stuff like that. But I get what you're saying. I think the important part is that they're talking to people that know what they're doing, that have experience.
I agree.
In the market,
and understand the market.
Exactly.
Right? You know, I think on the other side too of like the perspective of being sort of shamed into taking a private mortgage. There's a lot of reasons you take a private mortgage. Like lots of people. Like I have some clients. I have a friend of mine who just built a home. And we were talking, and he had bought a piece of land, he knocked it down, he got so far with the money he had, he built a really nice house, and halfway through he said, what can we do? And I said, well, you're really in a funny spot, because no bank is going to lend you money on a half-constructed home. It just doesn't exist. And he did it. He had resources, he ended up getting to the end. But when he got to the end, he called me and said, there is no chance that if I did this again, I wouldn't have just taken I would have taken the private money. Because in hindsight, the stress of having to go through this all didn't save me anything at the end of the day, because I stressed every day for 5 months, and the cost ended up being sort of inconsequential to the equity he built and the outcome. And so, you know, there's two sides of that, right? There's the flippers, like all those people nowadays, lots of times the reason they're going for private money, or the reason the private sort of market has grown so much, is because they've dealt with the banks and they realize that they're getting caught and having to go to private money anyways because something doesn't go well. And so there's this expectation that you're only in a private mortgage because you've made a mistake. And that's not necessarily
no, I agree.
I think there's two sides.
Well, and I don't like this characterization, but sophisticated borrowers and unsophisticated borrowers. I'm really talking about unsophisticated borrowers that are just own their own home, and they're in a tough spot for whatever reason. Those people being exploited is sickening, and you see that, and they don't know any better. And the guys that are flipping properties, it's just the cost of the money is just another input in their analysis, right? So the money costs 10 points. The labor is going to cost this. The materials cost this. That's just another way to So the money doesn't. It matters what is the outcome, right? But these people that are just trying to survive and keep their house, like those people being exploited and taken advantage of.
Well, and sometimes it feels like exploiting, but you have, unfortunately, in our world right now, with compliance written in trust companies and credit unions, you've got unsophisticated mortgage brokers that are defaulting to private loans before trying to grind out the B deal. So what's happening right now is, and we had some stats through our network, the private loans across Canada are 10% higher than what they were before, and the B deals are lower.
Wow.
Right? And
Because people are going immediately to the private sector.
Well,
it's an easy solution.
If I'm not a good mortgage broker, let's say I'm an average mortgage broker, I'm busy, I'm stressed, just like people are in their jobs.
Time is limited.
And then if someone comes to me and I don't know exactly how to position it, because let's be real, the trust companies and credit unions, we love you and we're so glad you're there, but you're not exactly the easiest to deal with.
It's changed. Like, I think we've talked before and said, when I started working as a broker, if you had 25% down, it was pretty much...
And you
like
wrote your
a
name
deal.
on a napkin.
Right. I mean, you could
like,
take 3 referral letters for income at some point in my work career, and that's changed. And so nowadays, it's, we've seen that sort of transition to say, it's much more difficult to deal with.
It's harder, I would say, to deal with an equity lender than it is a bank lender.
Absolutely.
Right? And so
there's
now,
almost more qualification to be.
So now people are defaulting to private and say, oh gosh, you know what? You have to take 8 or 9%.
Right.
And I think, unfortunately,
That's the most interesting point that I've heard here tonight as a non-mortgage broker. Really.
We didn't rehearse this one?
No. You really need. That's why you need to go to mortgage brokers that know what they're doing, so that you're not just
It's true.
funneled into the private money. If there's a chance to do the B
It's true,
money,
and you know what? A lot of
yeah,
people
that's-
won't do
that's
it,
really
and,
important,
and this is a message we like to share because it's painful.
Yeah,
when for us to grind out a B deal, it's fucking
lot of work.
painful.
Yeah,
and then the client's going, oh my god, I feel like I'm giving blood, but it's like, you know what? I'm saving you 5, 6, 7%, and I could just go 10%, and we could be done. But listen, this is in your best interest.
And I also think from the client's perspective, what you find a lot, and there's sort of blame on both sides there. Lots of clients have an ideal outcome, and nowadays they're holding off on trying to give you the documentation you need, or because they're hoping that this circumstance works out instead of giving you the time to sort of help them out. And because Mitch and I have done a few deals where something went wrong, but the window is 2 days. There's no lender that's giving you the money.
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
Only a private person can solve that problem. If you give us a lead time of a month or 6 weeks, we can maybe put together a better solution for you.
Or slow the process down, right? Because we've been in situations before too where it's like, hey, listen, you know what? You can spend $20,000 and 10% in fees and all this for a private mortgage, or maybe we can get an extension. And I know nobody likes to hear that conversation, right? But it could be cheaper to say, hey, Mr. Seller, you know what? Why don't I give you an extra $5,000 or $10,000 instead of me paying $20,000 or $30,000 in fees to get an extension? I know that's a tough one, but
but depending on the circumstances, it's a really smart decision, and a lot of the times it works, especially in this market right now. Depending on what the seller needs to do, but even then, there's ways that you can work something out.
And I think in a circumstance like what you notice is having a quality realtor and a quality lawyer and a quality mortgage person who all communicate with each other. One of the unfortunate circumstances that I see all the time is I work inside a real estate office, and when there's something going wrong, people sometimes won't talk to each other. I think that's the biggest mistake. If there's a problem, or you think there's a problem, clients need to say that right away and say, hey, I think there's a problem.
Fix it.
Can we fix this? And if you get enough lead time, I'm sure for you, you find it all the time, like it's a day before closing, someone's tossing you with a problem instead of it's the same problem that existed 8 weeks ago, but they were just hoping that you didn't notice. and it ends up, in a lot of circumstances, like we've done this year, so many first mortgages on houses that didn't sell. And for a lot of reasons they don't qualify to do anything else, but it's like in a lot of ways I feel like you could have I don't know how you didn't see it coming.
You know what? It's kind of like the dirty secret that nobody talks about, right? Because no one wants to talk about the house that didn't sell and you still had to close on it. Nobody wants to talk about it because everybody feels, but it happens a lot.
Absolutely.
I want to flip this for a sec because we talked about the borrowers. Let's talk about investors.
Okay.
Do you know what I mean? Because I think the flip side of the coin is investors are running to private mortgages. I'm sure you get people all the time. I get people all the time saying, Brian, put my money into real estate. Let's invest my money. I don't know anything about it, but let's invest in mortgages.
Well, I think if I looked at the investor perspective right off the bat, what I get a lot of, and I'm sure you too, I have 20,000 or I have 50,000 or I've got, a certain amount that I want to put out there, which, certainly you're getting deals that might fit that amount, but that's not necessarily what you're getting.
It's a hard
all the time.
one. Yeah.
Right? To fit exactly the 114,500 that you have to send out. I think the first
Based on your risk
parameters,
right?
In the next 2 weeks, it's just something that it is not that common. But what you need to look at, the most important strategy is, what is your exit plan? How is this person going to not end up in a bad position? And what is the end result or the end game plan to get the money back?
And I think that's what the investor needs to look at all the time, because to your point, when you see the ones that are just going and going and going, clearly a broker put them into a plan with the never plan.
They didn't care. They didn't care about the borrower. They just cared about making the fee. And that's very rare that I see that. But it does happen.
It does happen.
And clearly,
you got to be honest that it happens.
It does happen. And they were set up from the beginning that nobody cared about what happened to these people, and now they're going to lose their house. But the broker, made $20K in fees on a couple mortgages, right? And I'm not talking bad about brokers. This one in particular, I would, and I'd have no problem. But it's true. But it's called. But it's called for. But So I.
Wait, who is it? No,
no, it doesn't matter. But that's very rare that you see stuff like that. But that's somebody that didn't think. These people went into default, 4 or 5 months after they started the mortgage, because they couldn't afford the payments. It was ridiculous. So there was no exit strategy. And now the second mortgagee that's starting an action for possession is in a tough spot himself, because now he's got to worry about keeping the first private mortgage up to date, right?
Yeah.
And he's running out of money.
Sure.
So it's really tough. So the broker didn't think about even the lender, one of the lenders that he referred this deal to. So it's just really important to work with people that have experience.
And part of that strategy to get out of it is, in the circumstance that somebody, say you had the money and you put out a $300,000 first on a property that you thought was not going to be a problem. If something goes wrong as an investor, you have to have the access to the capital to pay up any other problems, pay out the first. If the property's under construction, if you want to see your return, you may need to go in there and you may need to fix it. Like, you need to have a backup plan or some sort of buffer to make sure that you can complete it all.
Absolutely. That goes with the part of the planning.
The exit strategy and the sort of risk profile.
Yeah.
So let me ask you guys this, because this comes up a lot now. So you've got lend to title, right? So that's where Mitch is going to lend money and he's on title, right?
Right.
And then you've got mix. Right? So there's different risk profiles, different benefits to both, right? Because we do lots of MIC lending and then we do lots of lending directly to title, right? What do you see as the advantages to both?
I think what you find from the individual lender is you may have a slightly more complicated risk tolerance. One of the very consistent things we're doing, lots of what we do, is cross collateral. So lots of people will be in a situation where they're equity rich but not cash rich. And so utilizing, in a circumstance like, say you need to buy a house, you have a house with lots of equity and it didn't sell. So an individual will pay, almost buy the home for you, but utilize your equity in your previous home to secure the loan. With a MIC, it's a little less aggressive, I find. It may be slightly less interest rates.
Like, as an investor, you think it's a little bit safer sometimes, but you're getting a little bit lesser return?
Right. Well, I think that there's always powers in numbers, right? So on the mix side, they want their money out more often.
You got to roll it to make money quick.
Because they're keeping money from investors, so they're taking probably lower risk for a lower return. But if you're investing in a MIC who has 100 mortgages and one goes wrong, it's not as painful. If you have all your money in one mortgage, and it goes wrong, your risk is much higher.
So what do you think about, title, there's a big difference on title, right? So if I'm investing into a MIC, what would my risk be compared to if I'm directly on title?
Well, I only act for private lenders that are registered on title as the mortgagee, so they're the lender.
I'm the owner then. Like, if that house goes bad, I'm the owner of that house.
So sometimes I'm on do deals that involve MIC money, but I'm not acting for the MIC myself. So
That's Mortgage Investment Corporation.
Yeah,
right.
It's not a little Irish guy running around. Like,
So
who the hell is this Mick? I want to meet Mick.
Mick's got a lot of money.
hey, put me in touch with that MIC.
Mick works for Mission 35. Yeah.
So I only act for private lenders that are lending their own money and they're securing their loan with a mortgage on a property, right? So the security for your money is the property, right? So I personally lend money sometimes too, not as much as these guys and on smaller scale, but I lend that way and I like that way better because I'm comfortable with it and I feel like I'm in more control. I don't really have much to say in terms of the investment perspective between the two, other than me personally, I'd rather have the full return and the security myself. Yeah, I'd rather have the full return myself and pick the deal that I want to be in myself and have that security myself and make the decisions on, if I need to enforce the mortgage or take any steps to do that myself. But
Because the MIC, you're not on title. No. If I put my money into Preston MIC, right,
and fair
then if it goes bad, I share in the loss, and I could be sharing with Mitch and Joe and Jeff and Bob and Jane.
And a MIC is usually organized by somebody else who's taking part of the profits, which is
exactly
right.
Yeah.
Is that you're sharing in the loss? A MIC is also, and again, maybe I'm misconstruing it, but I think you're buying a stock in a company basically.
If it's set up correctly.
So you're basically a shareholder
Yeah.
in any win and any loss.
Yeah. Totally.
So
Yeah.
you're also paying administration. People are functioning or sort of administering the whole thing on your behalf, which costs money. And so maybe at the end of the day, you know what I know a lot of people do will get the return because say the GIC or the bond market right now is obviously not paying as high as it used to, so they're giving their money to someone to operate a MIC, but they might be getting a percentage return, but they won't get any of the fees or they won't get any of the sort of bonuses that maybe as an individual you're able to get back in your return.
Yep. I think that, you know what, the investing in MIC has its benefits for people. It's a great way to get your money on a regular, consistent basis. Yep. It's a smaller, safer return. I think it can have those benefits for investors, but I think there's just a misconception out there as to it's guaranteed. Right? I've heard that term before, and it's a pet peeve of mine. Because I've been to investment seminars where someone says, invest in this and it's guaranteed.
Yeah, right. That's ridiculous.
Right.
Yeah,
well, there was I about 2 years ago, wasn't it, out of Calgary, when Calgary saw such a shift in their housing market, there was a mix that were exposed to I think it was over $100 million. Like it was because they had raised so much and again, you have to understand that there's a risk profile, right?
Well, and I think that's looking at it if you're going to get into that market, knowing what their asset allocation is, right? Yeah. And that's something that a legit MIC, a legitimate little Irish guy, should come with an instruction manual. No, but the reality is that there are, and this is something we were talking about earlier today, is that OFSI is probably going to start to regulate these mortgage investment corporations in the next couple of years a lot more. And there's a lot of mortgage investment corporations that don't have policies and procedures. They don't have prospectus. They don't have asset allocations, right? And if they don't, then as an investor, you're kind of like, where's my money going?
Absolutely.
So then what do you guys do then if, for a potential investor, if you have a prospective borrower, how do you match them up with an investor? Like, what do you do?
Well, so I have a really good example of this because I think in a way, the way our conversation is going is a little bit that there's a great return for investors, but there's a whole bunch of risk, and it's not necessarily the investor who's causing the risk. I had a client call me recently who we had previously done a mortgage for. When the mortgage got to the end of the term, they had some issues going on and their family member had paid a couple of months of mortgage, and then at some point they just paid us out. And then I got a phone call from the person and they said, oh well, I thought the term was over, I thought it was over. And they had gone and done a new private to pay out the first private. And the reason the person had gotten into the private in the first place is because they were struggling, they lost their job and weren't paying their first mortgage. So then took a mortgage with an extended window to make a decision, then didn't do anything, then took another private to which also wasn't getting paid, and then they finally sold the house, and I got a phone call and they said, well, we want to buy this house. it's going to be 50% loan to value. Can't you get me any money? And I said, you know, I don't understand why you want to do that to yourself. Your track record as a borrower is that you don't make the payments.
Yeah.
You know, and so why don't you go and we talked about it, and I talked about with the agent, and I said, you know, this doesn't make any sense. Like, I don't, like, this is a bad decision for this person.
Yeah.
And so what they did is they found them a more suitable, and they used the cash to go buy something for cash.
Yeah.
And you know, because at the end of the day, it's like, you know, at some point you have to be able to look at it and say, this is not a good decision for them. They are not making the right decision for them.
You don't have to be a part of it.
Yeah,
You don't
exactly.
want-
Like, hey, you know, think about what you're doing here.
Yeah.
Don't do this.
That's what I mean when, you know, talking to people that, and you know, ultimately it's their decision, but you know, at least where you're talking to people that care about the outcome, right?
Yeah, you don't want to see that.
It's I think when you get in the private side, whether it's investors or borrowers, it's never as good as it looks.
Right.
I think
Absolutely.
on both sides, like it's true, right? I'm a borrower and I'm super happy. Hey, listen, it's expensive.
Yeah.
I'm an investor. I'm going to get a huge return. Listen, there's some risk, right?
Yeah.
In closing, I just want to say. Talk to a professional, like one of these two guys, obviously. Talk to someone who cares, because if you do want to make money, it's not as good as it looks unless you really get under the skin and take a look at things, right?
Don't get sold by either the return or what the interest rate is on either side, a borrower or an investor. Ask the questions and get full disclosure.
And have an exit strategy, whether you're a borrower or an investor.
Absolutely.
The borrower needs an exit. The borrower needs an
Yeah.
exit strategy. We always say it's like living in a hotel. It's a nice place to stay, but you can't live there.
Yeah,
You know.
absolutely.
And same with an investor. You want to make sure, like Kevin O'Leary says, when are my little soldiers coming back?
Yeah, absolutely.
Everybody needs an exit strategy.
Yeah.
So, guys, you know what? Sometimes it rains out there.
Right, so.
This is
Stay
exactly
covered
what I
up,
wanted.
Steve. It's
exactly what I
100% Egyptian cotton, custom umbrellas. Okay?
Organic plastic.
Yeah, all that stuff. But really, I want to say big thanks to Collective Arts for keeping us fueled up, and a big thanks to everybody for supporting us. A big thanks to you two guys. You guys are phenomenal, and I really appreciate you doing this.
Awesome.
Awesome. Stay tuned, guys. Thanks again. Thank you for this fabulous day. Cool.